Okay, thank you. Please, if you have anything any discussion, please take outside. Appreciate it. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Please identify yourself and proceed with your testimony, please.
Good afternoon, Council President Clark and members of City Council. I am Deputy City Commissioner Nick Custodio. Joining me are Deputy Commissioner Seth Bluestein and Budget Officer Valerie Crawford Keith. We are pleased to provide the testimony on the Office of the City Commissioner's Fiscal Year 2020 operating budget. The proposed Fiscal Year 2020 general fund budget totals $12,216,911, a decrease of $1,536,566 from Fiscal Year 2019 estimated obligation levels. The proposed Fiscal Year 2020 general fund budget includes $6,633,233 in Class 100 for employee compensation, $5,011,061 for Class 200 for professional services contracts, election board payroll, and polling place rentals, $462,772 in Class 300 election material and office supplies, and $109,845 in Class 400 for computers, furniture, and equipment. Thanks to your action last year, we were able to increase the stipend for election board workers. This was the first pay raise that the board workers had received in at least 30 years. Members of our election boards frequently thank us and the commissioners for the raise, and we wanted to make sure to pass those thanks on to you all. We hope this goes a long way to improving our board worker retention rates. Election board shortages are a national problem, but we are striving to fill every position on the election boards. To help accomplish this goal, and to train our next generation of board workers, we launched our student poll worker pilot program involved at 17. We have 3 schools participating in the program and about 85 students who signed up. After they are trained, staff in our election board unit will assign them to divisions to work. Student poll workers will also be eligible to receive an individual Governor's Civic Engagement Award, which we're giving out each spring. Our employee demographics as of December 2018 are 51 white, 43 African Americans, 3 Hispanic, 1 Asian, and 2 other. The demographics of our recent hires are 4 African Americans, 2 whites. Our department's OEO goal for MWDBE contracts is 30%. Our department's current level is 48%. During fiscal year 2019, the Office of City Commissioners oversaw the 2018 general election and will oversee the 2019 primary election, which is coming up on May 21st. The 565,124 voters who cast ballots in the 2018 general election represents a 46.4% increase in voter turnout from the comparable election cycle 4 years prior. Efforts to modernize the department, increase efficiencies, and ensure that the election process is open to everyone will continue to be at the forefront of our department's effort for fiscal year 20. In FY2019, we had a major step in modernization by working with the Office of Innovation and Technology and the Board of Ethics to create a new online campaign finance filing system which will allow candidates and committees to fulfill their filing requirements to both the Board of Elections and the Board of Ethics at the same time. Our goal was to have it up and running for the 2019 primary election, and I'm happy to say that we met that goal, launching it for the 2019 Cycle 1 reporting period. The Cycle 2 reporting period closed yesterday, and reports are due this Friday. Committees and the public can find our online campaign finance system at philadelphiacampaignfinance.com. Also in FY19, we started working with OIT to develop a GIS-based system for inspecting and storing our polling place data. This exciting work will allow us to replace the current paper-based system for inspecting polling places, and it will link to our polling place app on our website to more quickly provide voters with updates to polling place changes. The biggest modernization effort this fiscal year was the procurement of a new voting system. Our department was forced into a 2019 procurement timeline as opposed to our original 2021 timeline because the Department of State is requiring all 67 of Pennsylvania counties to replace their current voting systems with new systems that have a voter verifiable paper ballot. Philadelphia must have a new system in place in time for the 2020 primary election or risk voters using decertified equipment. The selected system provides all registered voters the ability to cast their voter-verified paper ballot on the same secure equipment. At the same time, we moved to replace our paper poll books with electronic poll books, a technology that many jurisdictions have used successfully for years. The electronic poll book will allow for faster and more efficient voter check-in at polling places and for voters to look up their correct polling places if they're in the wrong location. We have been operating under a notice to proceed with both vendors since April 25th. Last Thursday, the procurement department issued an intent to contract to both vendors, and we are on track to implement the new system in the 2019 general election, which will allow voters and the election board workers a chance to adapt to the change before casting their ballots for the president in 2020. So that voters are familiar with the new voting system and know how to vote successfully in November 2019 general election, we are planning an aggressive outreach effort to educate voters in communities across Philadelphia. Our goal is to conduct hundreds of demos, including one in each council district, that will be conducted by the vendor staff. We sent a letter to each district council member, and our office will be following up in the next month to get them scheduled. The city also plans a robust training program for our election board workers who will serve the voters on election day. Beginning this summer, we'll be holding an additional hands-on training for election board workers that will be taught by employees of the vendors. Election board workers will then receive their normal training in the fall. In June, we'll be launching a new section of our website that will have videos and information on the new voting system and electronic poll book. We look forward to partnering with you this summer and fall in helping Philadelphia's transition to the new voting system. We appreciate this opportunity to present our testimony and are happy to answer any questions that you have at this time.
No XL.
Thank you, and good morning. Let me give you a start off with a nice little softball. New machines, somewhat different than the prior machines. Will you guys be doing public meetings? And the question was asked in particularly like at senior citizen facilities. I know that the commissioner has done a number of events at schools. So is there a strategy associated with the outreach in terms of the educational process for the new voting machines?
Absolutely, Council President. As I said in my testimony, we are looking to conduct hundreds of these demos across the city of Philadelphia that will include senior centers, nursing homes, schools, civic associations, and various groups in public locations.
Okay. All right. Let me cut to the chase. So, it's been a lot of discussion in the commissioner's office, probably more so than the recent past has been the topic of discussion. It's primarily driven by the fact that we're getting new machines, this whole issue about machines and the Russia intervention, all of the issues, voter suppression. This is ground zero as it relates to a department that traditionally doesn't have this much attention. So we've heard a lot on both sides of the equation, some of it in the middle. So for our purposes, and we'd like to hear your response to a number of things. So one, we would obviously like to know how would these machines allow individuals with disabilities. That's one of the complaints that we heard about this particular machines and the hand-filled paper ballots. Let's talk about the procurement process. We need to get some things cleared up. Utilizing best value. Selection committee scored a tie between two top only certified vendors. The procurement commissioner did a separate round of scoring after the selection committee recommended negotiations to continue with both vendors and also declared a tie with their own scoring. Machines have an audible paper trail. I just want to confirm, yes or no?
Yes, this is all true.
Voters have the opportunity to make sure that the printed ballot is correct before casting a vote. City commissioners could only select machines okayed by the PA Department of State. A tie was recommended to the commissioners from the procurement, and the Department of State okayed the machine selected. And the city goes into contract with the company, can tweak the machines in the future given voter feedback. So I know that kind of went down that list. Can you just give me clarity on all of those issues? Because these are the issues that we've been hearing from citizens, both in our offices and at different forums.
Well, everything you said there was correct. It's specifically about security and the need for it to be certified by the Department of State. the city commissioners are limited by the election code to selecting only systems that are certified by the Department of State. The system that was chosen has been certified by both the federal EAC and the Pennsylvania Department of State. And as part of state certification, the system was sent to an independent security consultant for security and penetration testing. Tests were done to ensure that the election results, media reports, audit logs were protected from attempts to decrypt, manipulate reports and audit logs, and from attempts to change the election results or do any of this quote-unquote hacking. In addition to that, the physical computer equipment and ballots and important stuff in the machine are all secured behind lock and key and security seal. And then, yes, the system does have a voter verifiable paper ballot, which is mandated by the Department of State's order, and would allow voters to check their vote before they actually cast it. And before
So tell me how that works. Explain to me how that works.
So you mark your selection on the ballot marking device's touchscreen, and you put it on who you would like to select, and then you hit print, and then it prints the ballot right next to the screen, which the voter could then verify before they hit cast. When they hit print, nothing is...
Excuse me. Hey, folks, you will have an opportunity to speak. I believe the public testimony is this week, so we'll please ask you to respect the testimony. You will be given a significant opportunity to voice your concerns.
Yeah,
Thank you.
After you hit print, it will print your selections on your paper ballot, which will appear right next to the screen. At that time, no votes are actually recorded. It's not until you hit cast and the ballot is scanned will any votes actually be recorded. Voters will have the opportunity to decide if they would want to spoil their paper ballot and have another opportunity to vote. So nothing is that, yeah.
Okay, so why do you think that there's so much concerns raised about both the process, the operations? Is it that there has not been enough outreach, or, I mean, why do so many people think that, one, there's no paper trail, there's no ability to verify your vote? I mean, what do you think?
I think there's just a lot of misinformation out there. We were limited by the city's procurement rules to how we're able to communicate to the public during our selection process, which kind of hurt us on our communications. I think it's an outreach thing.
Okay.
And so once we start the demos in the summer and voters are able to see that they have a paper ballot and they have the opportunity to verify their vote before they cast it, the machine is very user-friendly. So I think once people get a chance to use it, I think public opinion will return.
Are there machines available to review now? I know there was one, I guess, in the caucus yesterday. Are there machines anywhere for people?
We have machines down in our Delaware and Spring Garden office. We will be getting public demonstrations after the primary.
All right, I'm not going to suggest to people how to do their job, but is there a reason why we can't do it prior to?
It's just in the primary election, we're still voting on our current equipment, so we don't want to cause any confusion with voters when they show up.
From a procedural issue,
correct.
It's not.
We're still doing demos at events with our current equipment, so we don't want to cause any voter confusion in the primary.
Okay, all right. So in your budget, you show a 1.1 million increase related to the next presidential election. How will these additional funds be spent? Is that primarily focused for the presidential, or is it just a needed increase in terms of other issues related to the department?
Thank you, Council President. So the increase in our budget for FY20 is in Class 100. So we have begun staffing up for the presidential election. and we anticipate additional overtime for the presidential election. When voters are very active, we have a lot more registrations coming in, so we need to make sure our staff are trained properly to process those registrations and that we have enough staff on hand to do so.
Okay. All right. I want to Chair recognizes Councilman Greenlee.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. First, I just want to recognize that the issue of outreach was mentioned a lot, and I know that Commissioner Dealey, and I think all the commissioners and the staff has been very diligent, and particularly going out to the schools, because I went to accompany Commissioner Dealey a couple times to various schools, and I think that's very important to try to get people, the students involved. You had the machines out there. I think that's very important, and I assume once these new machines are in place, you'll be doing similar events. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, all right. And just one day, and I saw a demonstration of this machine. I just want to be clear that there is, and you said it, but I just want to repeat it for the record. There is a way to check on paper what you plan to vote for before the vote is cast. Is that correct?
That is correct. In addition to that, Philadelphia is going to be one of 2 counties statewide that will be piloting the new enhanced auditing procedures that the Department of State is developing.
And it's important that, in your opinion, to try to have these machines ready for the November general election, because you anticipate probably some confusion simply because it's a new system, just like you had with the old one, correct?
We would like to have voters and poll workers get an opportunity to vote once before the busy 2020 primary starts, yes.
And usually, how much of an increase on average is there between, say, what you anticipate maybe for November and then for next year for the presidential election? Is there any rough estimate on how much that increases?
Yeah, it could be twice as many voters in the presidential primary as the municipal general.
Okay, so having what we call the regular voter at least familiar with the system one time is probably important, right? Because there'll be people probably in April next year voting for the first time on those machines that had not voted previously, correct?
That is correct, and we're going to continue our outreach efforts as we do normally for our office, but in a more robust outreach, I would say, through the November election into the primary, with the knowledge that probably half the primary voters have not voted on the new machine yet.
And again, you stated this in your written testimony, but there was no choice but to get new machines, right? Because
Correct.
Because I know some people still say, the old machines were okay, but
We
you didn't have a choice in that one, correct?
Our preferred timeline was to wait until 2021, but it was communicated to us that if we did not make a change, that the state would decertify our current equipment, and we would not have voting equipment for the 2020 primary.
I think a few people would have been upset at that, correct?
I think so.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman O.
Thank you very much, Council President. So I haven't seen the new machine myself, so I'm at a disadvantage, but I'd like to ask some questions. So one of my staffers told me that they tried the new machine, and there's a different process of voting. There has to be some confirmation. Could you, and you might have gone through this, but could you go through like how that machine actually works? It sounded a little complicated to me.
I wouldn't say it's complicated. It's very intuitive, but there is a verification process as part of the voter verified paper ballot. So it's very similar to the look and feel that we have now, where you go in and you put your choices on the thing. Instead of lights lighting up, the box that the candidate is in will turn green, and you have the opportunity to change your choices. And then once you've made your selections, you hit print ballot, and it will print on your paper ballot your selections in plain English.
So up until then, you haven't voted. So you get a printout, and then you check it.
That is correct. And then you have the opportunity, then the machine asks you, do you want to cast your ballot? And it's not until you hit cast that your vote is actually cast.
Can you change your mind?
Yes. You can.
So it prints a piece of paper, you can change your mind.
You can spoil your ballot.
And then it'll print another piece of paper?
What would happen if you once it prints, you can have the opportunity to spoil your paper ballot, which would trigger the poll worker having to come over and spoil your ballot. You black out your choices, and it would go into a spoiled ballot envelope. And then you go back over to the e-poll book, check back in, and get another paper ballot. It's in Pennsylvania, you get 3 opportunities to cast.
So what happens if somebody, for example, thinks they vote and left? Is that a possibility?
That is a possibility, yes.
So then what happens? The next voter comes in and do they vote twice?
There's a light on the machine.
Right.
That lights up when the machine is active. So if a poll worker sees a voter leaving, and the light is still on, then the poll worker can stop, hey, you gotta go back in and cast your vote.
Board of Elections.
Yes, and then if they do leave, the machine will chirp after a certain amount of inactivity.
Makes a noise.
Yes, so the poll worker can go in and
Okay.
reset.
And then finally, I understand it's in English and in Spanish.
Yes.
Is there a way that it does other language?
It can accommodate, I believe, up to 16 languages.
And can you put that in, or is that an additional cost, or?
I'm unsure about the additional cost. There may be like back-end software thing that we'd have to do, but the machine itself is technically capable of supporting up to 16 languages.
Okay, and then finally, I just like to say, and I don't know all the reasons, so I'm not against what you're trying to do. What I am kind of wondering is, it's like we're in the middle of an election. There was a primary, there's a general, and you're kind of pretty much saying that you're doing a test run of this machine in the general election because you're anticipating large voter turnout, which is true, next year. But it's kind of midstream in the election, which I just, because basically we're going with the common understanding that like 90%, if not 95% of this election will be done after the primary, the Democratic primary, then, we just got this other, thing in the general. Although I don't know that that is fair, to just switch machines in the middle of election, just to me, I just wonder about that. Why not start off, give more opportunity to train? If in fact the voter turnout is low it might even be lower in November than in the primary. Why not, so people aren't really experiencing the machine, why not put more of an effort into teaching people how to use the new machine so that when they do it in because there might actually be more interest in the May primary, the presidential, than in the November election.
Thank you, Councilman. So for us, we have an election every 6 months. And we're always in the middle of preparing for the next election. And we believe very strongly that there's a great value to the voters to roll this out in the municipal general as opposed to the presidential primary. To give the election boards an opportunity to set these machines up without the pressure of a much higher turnout election is essential to making sure that we have a smooth presidential primary next year. And to have voters experience it, and those voters are more likely to turn out, so at least half of the voters will have already voted on it, is essential. And we're not going to stop our outreach just because we have a successful November election. We're going to continue a very robust outreach throughout preparing for the primary in 2020 to make sure that all voters have an opportunity to know how to vote on the new machines before they vote.
Thank you very much. I would just be very comforted if you start that outreach now for the November election, if that's what you're going to do. All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Green.
Thank you, Council President. Good morning. Just have some questions I wanted to ask in reference to the new voting machines and get some perspective. From my perspective and in my role as chair of the Council Committee on Disabilities and People with Special Needs, what steps were made in reference to these new machines to make sure they were ADA compliant?
They are certified by the Department of State, and the part of the state certification is they have disability advocates and testing by people with disabilities as part of the certification process.
And that was part of the state certification process?
Yes.
Did we do anything at the local level in reference to working with people to have any physical learning difference regarding voting machines or regarding the proposed machines?
We met with numerous groups, including Disability Rights Pennsylvania and Liberty Resources, and discussed the issues facing disabled voters and voting equipment.
Okay. I wanted to follow up on some questions that Councilor Greenlee asked regarding the timing, and I think I got some of the questions, but I wasn't totally familiar. I want to make sure I got an understanding. So, based on information you're receiving from the governor, that was the reason of moving forward now,
Correct.
in reference to the certification machines going forward, and that we would have a problem if we continue to use our existing machines if we did not move forward now.
Correct. The state government had communicated to us that they were planning to decertify our current equipment if we did not make a change.
And decertify the current equipment as of when?
I'm sorry?
Decertify the current equipment as of when?
We would not have equipment to use in the 2020 primary.
In 2020 primary, okay. Also, wanted to get some perspective on the cost of the machines. From your perspective, well, let me strike that for a moment. I know the city controller has made a statement regarding concern regarding the procurement process, from my understanding, and made a public statement regarding not moving forward with certain payments, from my reading. How will that impact this process from the commissioner's perspective?
From a commissioner's perspective, we're moving forward with everything we need to do to get ready for the transition to new voting equipment in 2019. The controller statements and all that is deal with the law department.
Okay. And what's the cost of the machines? Because I didn't see. I mean, I see some of the other information in the material, but what's the procurement cost for the machines?
The notice of intent to award a city contract, which was posted last Thursday, lists the cost at $28,959,502.
Is it 28 million?
$28,959,502 to ES&S.
Okay. And that cost is the cost for all cost in for machines in reference to, well, let me strike that. What does that $20 million, $28 million entail?
That is just the upfront cost.
Upfront cost for the machines themselves?
For the machines, the e-poll books are an additional $2,659,400 to New Inc.
Right, and what was that number again, that second number?
$2,659,400.
And what does that number represent?
That is the upfront cost for the electronic poll books.
Electronic poll books?
Yes.
Okay. So, but the $20 million number that you referenced, that's just the cost for buying the machines?
Yes.
Okay. What,
And the activation printers too.
and the activation,
Printers. There's a interface between the e-poll books and the machines.
Okay.
So when you check in on the new electronic poll books, the e-poll book will print a barcode on the paper ballot that is solely in reference to your ballot style. There's no voter information is recorded, but let's say if you're a Democrat living in 26-6 and you go to vote in a primary, it'll record your ballot style, so the machine will bring up just the Democratic ballot for your division.
okay.
And that's how, that's the printers how it tells that.
Now, are there any other costs associated with making this transition from licensing, other type of training costs, any other costs specifically tied to the machines, other than the $20 million?
There will be warehousing, some overtime costs for staff, for trainings. Yeah, those are the two main ones.
Okay, and so this contract, this is a one-year contract with your renewals, or is it multi? I would venture this type of contract will be a multi-year contract, so it will come to City Council.
I am not sure what type of contract it is. We can get back to you on that. That's what procurement has been handling that.
Okay. And make sure I have my other notes here. Hold on a second. And so how will you get the word out to the general public? And you may have said this earlier about how these new machines will operate, as well as how will you train existing election workers on the new machines? Will you use a
For
similar
the election board workers, we are planning to conduct a additional training class. So normally we train poll workers once before every election. We're going to train them twice before the November election, starting in probably early July. We're going to have an additional training class that will be conducted by the vendors themselves. And then in the fall, we'll have our normal training classes. So there'll be two opportunities for the poll workers to be trained. Hopefully, they'll get a training and a refresher before the November election. And in addition to that, we're planning to conduct about hundreds of demos across the city.
And you'll inform poll workers through the traditional means of how you currently
We
communicate?
will be sending a mailing to the poll workers with the training schedule in about June, after the May primary.
And then how will you educate the public as a whole regarding these new machines? Oh,
As
I
I
guess my
said,
time's about up, so.
we'll be conducting hundreds of demos. In addition, we're going to be updating a whole new section of our website dedicated solely to voting machine information.
And we do any type of public service type announcements or others to let people, I think one of the concerns is that people have been using the same machines for a long time, and you're trying to move to a new type of machine, and people are not as familiar. And I'm specifically concerned about those who have any type of physical learning difference, getting used to, or people that work or and their friends and family may assist them in voting, them not also being aware of the new machines. So will you be continuing doing your outreach with Liberty Resources and other groups?
We will be conducting outreach in every means available to us, including video and public service announcements. And
Okay. The bell rung, so I guess my time is up. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Dom.
Thank you, Council President. Good morning. A few questions I wanted to ask. The existing machines we have now, I understand they're required to replace them by the state. And did we have maintenance issues with those machines over the last 10 years? Were there problems with those machines?
I would say they were typical problems of aging equipment. So we've had that equipment since 2002. So over 17 years after the 10-year initial warranty, it became more expensive to continue to maintain them.
Okay. And what is the typical age of a voting machine? How long should it last for typically?
I can get back to you on that. I believe each machine probably has different warranty.
So the machines that we're talking about now, what is their expectancy? How long should they last us for?
I would expect them to last at least 12 years.
Okay. And then following up with Councilman Green's question, I just want to make sure I understood the costs. It sounded like, did I hear 28 million or 20 million?
28,959,502.
So like 29 million. And there was another 2.6 million?
Yes.
So if we're looking at this total dollars, is it roughly 31.5 million
Up front, yes.
up front? And then what's the annual cost? Is there an annual cost?
It's about $1 million a year.
Million a year. And how does that compare to what we're paying now?
It is a increase, hold on a second. We now pay $870,000 a year, so it's a slight increase.
Similar.
Yeah.
Similar.
This is, the increase was typical of the marketplace now.
Okay. There's some technical questions in our budget. It says the voting machines have been a line item in our capital budget since fiscal year 15, with an issuance of $25.5 million in new city debt that was scheduled for fiscal year 16. There were additional appropriations proposed to the capital budget for fiscal year 17, 18, 19, and finally fiscal year 20. How much have we actually borrowed to fund this purchase of the new voting machines?
Good morning, I'm Anna Adams, I'm the Budget Director. We haven't borrowed anything related to that. As you know, Councilman, we borrow on a cash basis, but we haven't used those appropriations yet, and so we don't borrow until we need that cash. We borrow on a cash basis.
So that's in the budget, 25.5 million?
So if you look in the FY20 budget, it looks like it shows a $22 million line for FY20, and that's what we were assuming that we'd need to find from the finance line to cover the cost of these machines. I think at this point, with the timing, we'll be probably using a lot of OIT carry forward and then replenishing that to make sure that we can buy the machines on time.
So let me ask my next question, then you may want to stay up here.
Happy to.
The fiscal year 20 capital budget shows that we anticipate receiving an additional 20 million from the state and also another 20 million from the federal government. This is what the budget's showing.
Yeah, that was our hope.
It was your hope.
That was our hope at the time. I think we now know from the governor's budget that we...
But is it true that the state budget shows that Philadelphia will get 1.9 million and federal appropriations will be 1.7 for a total of 3.6, and we were hoping for 40 million?
We were hoping for significantly more than we're receiving. So the governor's budget proposal shows that they are adding $15 million a year for the next few years statewide. I believe there's still a discussion exactly about how that formula will work. That's our estimate right now, is about 1.9. And that we are assuming will go into the general fund. The revenue will go into the general fund to reimburse us for costs that we're paying out of the capital budget.
But let me ask you a question. Why is our hope so far off from the reality?
So we always like to make sure we have room in appropriations when we also like to have an opportunity to negotiate. And so we kind of give ourselves, there was also a conversation at some point whether the federal government was going to add any additional funds. And so that line is, you can see it's other government, so it's an ability to get additional federal or state grants. And we didn't know, we also had, if you see, it has other opportunities just in case there were, and you can see this in any of the budget documents. We generally like to make sure that we have an opportunity. We're never going to close ourselves in and prevent ourselves from receiving any additional funds. Unfortunately, we thought we would get more than we were because the costs are so high.
It may be a rumor, but I mean, well, at least in my opinion, if the state's requiring us to change this equipment, why is the state not paying for it? And then I heard a rumor, I could be wrong, you can clarify this for me. I heard that maybe Senator Hughes was going to take up the battle with the state to try to get us more money. Do you know where that might stand?
And I think you'd have to talk to the state directly about why they're not adding additional funds. Obviously, I can't answer that. I'm not in the governor's budget office. I'm not at the state legislature. So we would advocate for as much funds as we could receive, because this is a significant cost to us, and I'm sure for any other county across the Commonwealth. And I'm not sure where that stands with Senator Hughes. I know that our delegation is supportive of finding ways to offset our costs, but
so when we say we're going to go to
the
the state, what do we actually do? What action do we take as a city to meet with the governor or the legislature? How do we actually go after that and discuss their funding of this big expense?
There are multiple ways that we do this. We meet directly with the state budget secretary. There are direct conversations that the mayor and the governor have. There are conversations directly with our delegation. We spend some time in Harrisburg. We have briefed all of our delegation with the commissioners about the voting machines and the cost well in advance. We did that in the fall, where we talked about that these were going to be significant costs. And I know that the commissioners also have direct conversations with the state at varieties of levels, both at the sort of the State Department level, the budget office level, at the governor's, for the governor himself, and then also with staff to staff.
I mean, is this body at all engaged in helping the administration to ask for more money?
Are you talking about city council?
Yes.
I'm sure that the council president has also had those conversations directly with, but I don't want to speak on the council president's behalf. I know that the mayor and city council and the council president have discussed this.
Okay. And one last question. Actually, two last questions. How many of the new voting machines do we have right now?
We currently have 3,735 voting machines.
How many total machines are required?
3,750.
Okay.
So an increase of 15 machines.
And how do we get the money to pay for that? Has that been paid for or has it not been paid for?
We have not paid anything yet.
When does that due?
The notice of intent to contract has been issued last week, so no payments will be made until the contract is conformed.
I have one last concern, and by the way, thank you for the demonstration yesterday of the machine. Here's my concern. I want to make sure that if we go forward or whatever we do, that we don't have a problem. And my concern is that, from my understanding, is that we'll be the biggest user of this machine of anyone else in the country. And I think you mentioned that next week Delaware is getting it, but Delaware is 1/3 of our size. So my concern is I want to make sure that whatever decisions we make, that they're successful decisions and they're positive and we don't have a problem. I'm a little concerned that we're engaging a contractor or a company to provide us with 3 times the largest supply of any other municipality they've done so far. I would, if you said to me 10 other places are using it and they're similar to Philadelphia, I'd feel very comfortable. I just don't like being the guinea pig here.
We don't feel
Let me just say this for the record. I'm not saying I'm for or against. I'm just saying I'm interested in making sure that whatever money we spend, we don't make a mistake, that's all.
Right.
So and if we do this and it goes forward, and I talked to you yesterday about this, make sure we have plenty of coverage and plenty of technical support and make sure that there's not going to be a problem.
Yes, we will.
Thank you. Thanks for all your work you're doing. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Council President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Bass.
Good morning. How are you?
Council.
I just had a couple of questions. And the first is that on the timeline, if you could talk a little bit about the timeline and the idea that this was required to be done. I believe it may have been dictated by the governor by February of this year. Can you talk a little bit about that and the Commissioner's Office understanding of the timeline?
To be ready for the November 2019 general election, the selection for a new system need to be made by February 2019. November 2019 is the most ideal target because it would give voters and poll workers an election under their belt for the April primary. In addition to our current equipment, will still be certified in November 2019. If there are any unexpected delays in implementation, then we can flip a switch and use the current equipment in November and still have an election. Moving the target to April 2020 presidential primary would only extend the selection timeline to about July 2019. A target of April 2020 leaves us vulnerable to unexpected delays in implementation. If they were to occur on an April 2020 timeline, we would be forced to use decertified equipment in a presidential primary, which I don't think anybody wants.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I just wanted to ask that about the timeline. And the other question I had for you was on the, there was an op-ed this morning, or editorial this morning, I saw it in the Daily News, regarding paper receipts, and it said essentially that if a recount was necessary, it would not be possible because Philadelphia voting machines do not produce a paper trail. Now, as someone who's been a committee person for a long time and now as a ward leader and sees the actual paper trail, I've got stacks and stacks of them. So I'm just wondering, how was that possibly misinterpreted? Or do you know what it is that they're specifically referring to that says that our current voting machines do not provide any sort of paper trail that will be necessary for a recount?
So the difference between our current machines and our new ballot marking devices that we're procuring is that the paper trail we get on our current machines is a summary of all the votes cast on that machine.
Okay.
So you'll see like there's 40 votes for Councilwoman Bass or on this one machine. The new equipment will have it down to the individual ballot. So you'll be able to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, like that kind of individual votes down to on a paper trail.
Okay. Okay, I understand. Also, so it just provides a higher level of detail.
Correct.
What will be provided, and it also seemed to suggest in today's op-ed that a recount is not possible, and we have had recounts in the city of Philadelphia before, so I'm not exactly sure what they're referring to as far as that goes. Can you speak to that? About recounts in the city of Philadelphia?
Probably what they're referring to is a full hand recount.
Say again?
Probably what they're referring to is a full hand recount.
Okay.
Whereas I was referring to there where it's if you remember Bush Gore 2000,
I sure do.
when
Yeah.
when the room full of people looking at ballots and putting them into stacks, that's the kind of recount I think they're referring to.
Okay. And finally, what kind of assurances can we give the general voting public? I know that, there's a lot of concern on all sides because we want to get it right. And so how can we reassure our citizens that, like this is going to be, the system that we have is going to be something that's tamper-proof, that it's going to be effective, that it's going to be easy for voters and for election day workers? Because one of the things that might be of concern is this new process and the new options, is it going to create long lines at the voting booth on election day? Is that something that we're going to have to be greatly concerned about? So can you talk about just, how is this going to work to, make voters feel more secure in what the decision of the commissioners has been?
I'll say that in two parts. As far as the ability for people to adapt to it, it is very similar in the look and feel of the equipment. They've not only been voting on since 2002, but it's very similar. Like they've been voted on since we've had voting machines in Philadelphia. It's a full-face ballot where you can see the selections you're making. The only difference is you now have the voter verifiable paper ballot as an additional security. As I said, this equipment also went through a vigorous certification process with both the Department of State and federal government. And part of the state certification, it had to undergo penetration testing where they tested the election media to make sure it couldn't be decrypted or manipulated.
Okay.
So there's an independent security consultant went in and tested the security on this thing.
Okay. So essentially, the Commonwealth has signed off on this equipment,
Yes.
and they are in support of using this equipment. So the governor's office, the Secretary of State and so forth.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
Yes, and Philadelphia is going to be at the forefront of using the enhanced audits after this election. So not only is the equipment secure and certified by the Department of State, but we are going to be doing enhanced audits.
Okay. Are other counties using this equipment as well?
I believe Northampton County is also looking to procure this equipment too.
Do we know how many different types of machines are being used throughout the entire Commonwealth? Do we have any idea? No.
I believe there's 5 total vendors that are going to be up for certification. Hart hasn't gotten certified yet. I think currently there's 4, and 1 is working its way through the EAC and state certification process. Each vendor may have various equipment options. So probably as many as 10, I would say. But I'd have to get back to you. No more than 10.
No more
but
than
I'd have to
10.
get back to you
Okay.
on the specific thing.
So 10 or less for all, 66 or 67 counties in the 60 plus counties in the Commonwealth. So I hear the bells rung, so I know my time is up. But the last thing I would just add is that it feels to me that this was something that really should have been handled on the Commonwealth's level, because my thinking is that if we really want to encourage people to turn out and we really want to encourage them to vote, that across the board there really should have been one system statewide for everyone. If I live in Philadelphia, if I move to Montgomery County or Delaware County, it shouldn't be a separate system that I have to now figure out, okay, like what do I do? I'm somebody who votes every single election. Like I've never missed an election. And so every time I go in, I have to sort of like catch my breath. Okay, what am I doing here? Let me just make sure I've got my bearings and make sure that I'm, doing this right, because you only do it every 6 months. But if I'm moving or if I'm changing, if I'm transient, then once again, I have to just sort of reconnect with the equipment that's in this new county or this new place, wherever I am. So I really do think that this is something that the Commonwealth should have been charged with across the board in terms of making sure that all voters throughout the state have a system in place that's going to really work. So, I thank you for the work that you do, but I just think that it's something that the Commonwealth really should have been, had the responsibility for, and not the local city commissioners here in Philadelphia and throughout the state. So, but thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Green.
Thank you, Council President. I wanted to follow up on some questions that Councilmember Dom raised. If Ms. Adams can come back. My understanding that it was a placeholder put in the budget looking for about $40 million from the Commonwealth. Is that correct?
I think we had appropriations in a couple of different places. One was like 20 million in sort of state and federal other governments, and then we had some private appropriations in there just in case we got additional funds. We didn't know when we put the budget together how much we thought we would get, and also we didn't know whether there would be any adjustments during the budget process at the state. We were hoping that there would be some increases during the budget negotiations at the state level, so we kept the appropriations relatively high.
Okay, but that sounds, I understand that you've got to appropriate dollars in case if you do get them, so you don't have to go through the whole budget process again. But from a $28 million, well, let's say $30 million cost to another $40 million on top of that, even with giving yourselves a cushion for appropriation, that's a pretty wide spring. I guess my question is there a feeling there's going to be additional dollars needed for these new machines? And that's why, even if it was a $10 million appropriation, but a $40 million appropriation on top of 28 seems like a pretty big swing.
Yeah, I mean, it was just partly because we didn't know where the funds had come from. So part also when we put the budget together, we didn't know what would be eligible for the for reimbursement. So, for example, we have, I think Nick had mentioned this, there are costs in a variety of places that we're having to include in the budget. So there's the cost of the machines and the poll books and the printers, but there's also maintenance and licenses and then a new warehouse. There's kind of a variety of costs that are sort of spread throughout the government, including also at OIT for assistance in preparation for the machines. So there's a lot of different costs, and we weren't sure exactly what would be eligible, so we wanted to make sure that we gave ourselves room in case the state or we received other funds from the federal government to be able to offset some of these costs.
So this $28 million, this is going to be a one-year contract or a multi-year contract?
So there's a few different things within that 28 million that Nick mentioned. So there's the cost of the machines themselves, and that those are capital costs, which will be a one-time cost in the capital budget. Then there are printers, and printers are not capital eligible because they don't have the long enough useful life. Mm-hmm. So we anticipate that we'll be having there'll be a cost, part of the transfer ordinance that we have proposed to adjust money in the current year budget is to allow for the cost of those printers to be bought out of the operating budget this fiscal year. And then there's also electronic poll books. Neither of those have a long enough useful life that we will be able to use the capital funds for them, and so we'll have to get on a replacement cycle for those printers and the electronic poll books. We're still determining what that cycle is and how many we would need to do and at what basis, but we know that every few years we will have to replace those two items because those aren't sort of the long, big machines that are capital eligible.
So that's the printers and electronic poll books?
Yes, but there's also kind of maintenance and licenses and all of those other costs, right, which are annual costs.
Exactly. So are those going to be done on an annual basis or a multi-year basis? Because it seems like...
So there'll be an annual...
Hold on. Considering that the poll books and the printers, because unlike other capital items have a shorter life, would it make more sense to lease them over a multi-year contract if those printers or e-poll books technology upgrades go into effect? Why would we buy them when we know they're going to have a short life and continue to have to do that? I
think the cost comes in a little better for us if we buy them on a sort of, we'll use them so often, and the cost of leasing, we'll have to pay the debt, so we'll have to pay the lease costs for that too. So we think I think it's a cheaper option for us to buy and then replace on a regular
But even
schedule.
But you're also talking about licensing and other things, because you couldn't have included the licensing and other equipment costs as a multi-year lease, as opposed to buying e-poll books, buying printers. The license is going to be over a period of time. You could have done a procurement that includes all of that together.
We can show, if it would be helpful, Councilman, we can kind of show you those kind of we can kind of put it in a table form so you can see why we chose the way we've chosen it and why we think it makes more financial sense, but we're happy to share that with you so you can see the analysis that went behind it.
So at the end of the day, all of the expenditures for the new voting machines will be based on one-year contracts with renewals.
And I'm not a procurement expert to know exactly how the contract is structured, but there'll be multiple contracts, I will say.
But multiple one-year contracts.
None of these will be long-term contracts. Yeah, they will all be kind of, we aren't seeking a multi-year contracts. There will be one-time contracts with renewals, yes.
Even the licensing, which is going to be over a period of time, that's still going to be...
There will be annual licensing costs, yes.
Right, annual licensing costs, but you know you're going to have that every year. So why is the annual licensing costs going to be a one-year contract with one-year renewals when you know during the period of time you're going to have electronic poll books and new voting machines, that's going to be more than 1 year at a time?
And again, I don't want to pretend I'm something I'm not. I'm not a procurement expert. I believe this is just the way typically these things are structured. And we're not doing anything different than we would normally do with any kind of IT technology contracts. These are the typical way that this has been structured, and so we're following that same method.
Yeah, but most of our IT contracts generally have not been done in one-year increments. It's a multi-year I guess my concern, this goes back to issues that I've seen historically where for some reason contracts, and this is not just this administration, it's other administrations as well, contracts are put together in a one-year time period with multiple year renewals because under the charter, any contract over a year has got to come through City Council for approval, which includes public hearings and other conversations. And so this, like other contracts historically, I've seen have been drafted in a way to not have to come in front of council because they're less than a year with multiple year renewals, as opposed to a multi-year contract, which will have to come to council through a ordinance.
Sorry. This was structured this way, I believe, because to allow us some flexibility, but I'm sure there could be other people who could respond more about how those IT contracts are structured. This is just something that I'm aware of. This is typically how we've done these types of contracts in the past, and I think that's why we followed the same methodology here.
Okay, the bell has rung. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman O.
Thank you very much, Council President. So I'm understanding that this is really kind of something you must do, but also there's been concern about hacking elections, going into computer systems, that type of thing. Is that true or not true? In other words,
I don't think it had been made.
the interest in these voting machines, in addition to it's time to replace them, has also been about hacking elections. So this produces a electronic tally as well as a paper trail.
Correct.
And so because it produces an electronic number you can tally, I would imagine you could tally pretty quickly.
We are trying to replicate our current election night reporting structure, which gets results back relatively quickly for a city of our size.
All other processes, do they stay the same? People come in, you get a sign-in book, you sign in.
The only real change will be what they're voting on and what they're signing in on. So now instead of signing in on the paper poll book, they'll sign on the e-poll book.
So where's that? Is that in the machine?
No, the e-poll book will be at the table with the election board workers.
So there's no more paper book?
No, there's
an electronic book?
They'll be signing in on an electronic poll book.
Okay, and does that electronic book, so that records it, or does that compare signatures, or what?
It compares signatures. So all this stuff that's done on paper right now with the paper book will be captured and done with the electronic poll book.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Bass.
Thanks again. Quick question. What happens if these machines during the course of an election go down? Like what happens?
we're going to have a maintenance team that are out around the city like we currently do, to
So
conduct.
you would send someone out?
Yeah, to conduct repairs or drop off a replacement.
Okay, all right. So, which is that the current process now?
Yes.
With, when machines go down? Is that susceptible to, like, interference or hacking or, like some of those concerns? Can you talk about that a little bit? I guess what
yeah.
people feel is that,
Is your question, like, if the machines are hacked on election day,
I'm sorry?
Is your question about if there's a hacking incident on election day, would our techs go out and detect that?
Right, I guess what I'm trying to probe here is that if something goes wrong, if the machine goes down, if there is interference, like what happens next? What's the response from the office? Is there a game plan for that?
The poll workers will call up the voting machine hotline, and our technicians will first talk to them and try to triage it over the phone, and then we'll send a technician out to investigate, and then depending on what the technician determines, we determine the next step.
Okay, so a technician will come out
Yeah.
and try to repair the machine and see what's sort of troubleshoot, if you would?
Yes,
Okay.
that's correct.
What happens, actually, can you speak to there was just an article that came out about voting machines that showed up just recently, that there were 83 machines or something to that effect, that showed up in the commissioner's office without a contract being signed. Can you address that?
We received an advanced shipment of 83 machines that we need to do acceptance testing on, so that way we can use those machines for the training and demos for the summer. Each machine that we get, essentially, we test drive it. It's like you're buying a car. You drive your car before you do it. Our technicians go through and spend about 45 minutes on each machine, going through and testing it and make sure that everything works. There's no scratches or dents. The doors close and lock properly. You can go through and vote. They test the ADA devices to make sure that the buttons work, the headphones jack work. They test to make sure that the sip and puff jack is responsive, and that takes about 45 minutes a machine. And we're also gearing up for a primary election. So the staff that we would allocate to doing that acceptance testing is also the staff that is going to have to start shipping our current machines for the primary election next week. And so we needed to get that advanced shipment when we did, so that we can finish up the acceptance testing without interfering with the primary election, so that we can have equipment that we need to do demos and training in the summer.
Okay. So even though a contract hasn't been signed, if that is the idea that if the machines aren't performing, you're going to return them, or?
Yes.
Okay.
The procurement department issued a notice to proceed, which allows the vendors to start providing services to us while limiting the city's liability as we wait for the contract to be finalized.
Okay. Because I think from appearance side, it gives the appearance that even though a contract hasn't been signed, that it is a done deal, and that it's just moving forward regardless of, the public concerns that may be addressed around it. So I don't know if you could speak to that at all. And again, we're in the business of really trying to reassure the public that we're, doing the right thing, that we're trying to do the right thing at all times. So I don't know if you could speak to that, because, just getting the machines in early might be, it's not probably the best look for the department.
As Seth stated, we had a notice to proceed from the procurement department on April 25th, which would allow the vendors to start issuing us services while limiting the liability of the city to, I think, $35,000. And we were operating under that. We're in a tight turnaround here to get this ready for the November election. So everything we did is done in order to meet the tight deadline that we're under. We had the notice to proceed on the 25th. We received the shipment on the 29th, and the contract is being finalized. We had the notice of intent was issued last Thursday, so it was just a timing irregularity.
Okay, all right, and so all of the machines will go through the same process?
Every machine will go through the same process, yes.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank
you so much,
Mr.
Councilwoman.
President.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Down.
Thank you, Council President.
Welcome.
I just have two other questions. Because of some of the, I guess, concerns that some people have had, I assume there was a leasing option and a lease maybe to own option if we had for these machines? Was there a leasing option?
Yes, the RFP asked for leasing options and lease to own and every type of option that's available.
Right. And would it make sense, I didn't see the proposal or the results of the proposal, would it make sense for us to look at maybe doing some sort of a structure where we lease it for the first 2 years, but then we have the right to buy it and those lease payments get applied to the payment if we're satisfied with the equipment?
I believe all of these options were reviewed by the selection committee and submitted to the procurement department, and the option that was chosen
Just to purchase it? Okay, I mean, I just think that that might be something to visit, because if there's some uncertainty or some problem, then we're stuck with the product. It's like dating. The other question I had was, do we need to borrow any money for this purchase? Will we need to borrow any money today or in the future for this purchase of machines?
Hi, Councilman. Yeah, as this is part of the capital budget, this will be part of the regular GO borrowing that we will do.
So we will be borrowing money.
Yeah, the capital component of this we'll borrow money for, yes.
How much will we be borrowing?
So the component that is capital eligible, which I think is around 26 million, will be part of our capital borrowing.
And so when we borrow that money, what's the term of the borrowing typically?
I think that's a question for Rashia. I don't have the interest rate. We have an assumption built into the plan, and I can get you that, but we tend to budget relatively conservative for that, but it'll depend on market conditions at the time. But yeah, Rashia would be able to provide more information about that.
Because really, if we're going to borrow the money, it's not just the cost of what we're saying today, it's also the interest
Absolutely.
on the borrowing of that money.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's why we've been, for the last few years, trying to do as much pay-as-you-go capital as we can. So if we have that opportunity again this year, we'll try and do the same thing. Any opportunity we have to kind of put more on the operating side so that we're not borrowing and paying interest on it, that's definitely been a factor for us. So part of when Nick mentioned the 28 million, some of those aren't capital eligible, but we're trying to put as much as we can on the operating side, bearing in mind we also have challenges there.
Right. So, I mean, I learned that to ask this question because I'm going to bring up something that's not pleasant, which is 46th and Market, where we did borrow 60 million, and it's going to cost us 40 million in interest roughly for the borrowing over the time period. So I guess what I'd like to see is some sort of analysis given to council as to what's the real cost, including the borrowing, including all the interest over time. What will that real cost be to the city?
Yeah, and we can do that. We bear in mind of what we're assuming right now is capital eligible. Yes, we can do that. I mean, obviously, I know that the Treasurer's Office refinance regularly, but based on what the current conditions are, we can do that analysis for you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman is not here. Okay, thank you. I had a couple of quick questions. Voter fraud, significant level of conversation. And we're looking into that. I don't think that we've experienced any measurable amount here in the city, but just for purposes of what are we looking at here to ensure that we don't have any voter fraud, anything in particular?
Thank you, Councilman. Our office works very closely with the District Attorney's Office to be prepared for each election for potential cases of voter fraud, and we cooperate with any investigations that they do after the election.
Okay. All right, thank you. All right. Oh, okay, Councilman Green came back. Chair recognizes Councilman Green.
Thank you, Council President. Just trying to multitask here. I wanted to just follow up on some questions that were going on with Ms. Adams, and just trying to get a sense in reference to, I think, also some questions that Councilmember Bass and also Councilman O raised, because there's been a lot of concerns, and I asked some questions about educating the public on the new voting machines, and there's been a lot of concerns and issues regarding hacking and paper ballots and other perspectives. So I want to get a perspective from you. What assurances are you providing to the public that these machines are not going to have those problems?
As I said, these machines had to go through a vigorous certification process by both the federal EAC and the Pennsylvania Department of State. And as part of the state certification, the system was sent to an independent security consultant for security and penetration testing. Tests were done to ensure that the election results, media use, reports, and audit logs were protected from any attempts to decrypt, manipulate, or corrupt the election data. The system also meets requirements that was written by the Office of Innovation and Technology security experts. And furthermore, the hardware, election media, and ballots are secured with lock and key and security seals.
Okay, and as we were going through this process, was there any coordination with other counties that were also in the process of getting voting machines? I know I participated with the County Commission Association of Pennsylvania. Have been other coordination with those type of groups as we were going through this process?
Yes, we participate with the County Commissioners Association and are in contact with other counties.
And representatives from the Commissioner's Office and OIT went with other counties to Harrisburg to meet with the Department of State and Homeland Security to go through security training.
Okay. And then one other follow-up. I just want to make sure, because I think when you were talking to Councilmember O about the process in reference to the ballot, so you go into the voting booth, you push your buttons, you get a printed ballot, and then you say that's okay, and then that goes over a printer? I want to make sure I understand the full process.
It gets scanned after you hit cast. It gets scanned.
So it gets scanned after it's printed?
It gets scanned after it's printed, yes.
Okay, and so that scanning process, who controls that scanning process? So
The scanner is part of the design of the machine.
Yeah.
So there's nobody touching the paper. It stays behind the glass, and it's printed and scanned within the machine.
So you see the print, and then it gets scanned.
Yes.
Okay, I guess the question is that you're taking the printed information based on your vote, and then you're putting it over a scanner.
Yes.
It's going over a scanner. So it
Yeah.
gets printed, and then it's scanned. So when I push the buttons, I see my ballot, and then after I see my ballot, now I say it was okay, then it goes over a scanner.
Yes.
Okay, I guess the question, who controls the scanner? That's all?
It's all it's all part of the machine. It's little wheels that like suck the ballot up into the scanner.
So what if there's any issue with the scanner itself or stuff like that?
If there's any issues with any part of the machine, our techs will be trained to.
Right, and that goes back to what Councilman Bass was saying, that the machine breaks down or anything.
Correct.
Okay, and you're confident that this system is okay based on certification from the Commonwealth?
Yes.
And there are other counties in the Commonwealth using this machine?
The Northampton County is, I believe, is the other one that's seeking to purchase the same equipment, and the entire state of Delaware is using this in a
Right,
statewide
that's
election next week.
Okay. And once again, you're also confident this machine, based on certification from the Commonwealth level, is also going to be okay for people that have any type of learning or physical difference?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, it just seems like there's a lot of issues and concerns regarding the machine, especially that scanning process, which to me seems somewhat challenging. Just the scanning process just gives me concern. I just saw a report earlier today talking about all machines even, not just this machine, but all machines currently being used have the potential to be hacked. So it just raises a concern when you're putting something, and not just this machine, I'm talking about all, and that's something that from an industry perspective is a problematic, that we can, for ATM transaction or Visa debit cards, that's all, but for some reason in the voting industry, and it's not so much on the commissioner's perspective, but more as an industry, and it's where we need guidance at the federal level, but for whatever reason, this administration doesn't have an interest in making sure things are more safe for people. I don't know why. I don't know why this administration has that perspective. I could assume, but you should not make assumptions. But it just is something as a technology industry, when we have technology that can do so many other things, the voting integrity is problematic.
I'd say...
I think that's an issue, I think, for any of the machines. From what the brief research I've done, I think all the machines have those issues. And that's more of an indictment of us as a nation, that we don't have better integrity of our machines, especially based on what happened in the last election and what could happen in the future election.
Well, that's part of the benefits of the transition to the voter verifiable paper ballot. Where now, on our current equipment, it's all electronically stored. The official vote record for recounts and audits will be the plain English language on the voter verifiable paper ballot. So if there is any issues with the scanning, it will come up in the new robust audits that we're piloting in November, and the entire election will be able to be hand recounted using the official record off of the paper ballot.
Okay. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilman. That concludes our questions for the Commissioner's office. Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you, Council President.
Thank you.